This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today, as my special guest, we have the youngest Hart son, the youngest son of Stu Hart. He's wrestled for WWE, he's wrestled for Stampede, he produced the Stampede Wrestling television show, and him and Bruce were involved in training a lot of wrestlers, mostly the Hart grandchildren in recent years, and even had a hand in training me. So Ross, how are you doing today, sir?
Great, Devin. Thanks for having me on your show.
Always a pleasure. And I understand you recently came through a little bit of a health battle. So glad to see you doing well.
I had COVID about 2 weeks ago. Caught it from one of my roommates, but I had pretty mild symptoms and got over it in about 4 days. I didn't experience the really bad things like loss of taste or smell or diarrhea or anything like that. Really just a bit of a fever and runny nose and sore throat, but I was over it in 4 days and feel as good as new. But, I can say that getting vaccinated doesn't mean you're not going to get COVID, but I think it's certainly going to minimize the effects that it has on you if you are vaccinated. And I got through it with flying colors, if you can actually say that. And I'm glad it's behind me.
Yeah, I actually had it around Christmas time, despite being vaccinated as well. And I do think that the vaccine might help reduce the symptoms. As you said, I didn't get the loss of taste either.
No, that's good, Devin. Yeah. Well, it would take a lot to knock you down. You're pretty tough and strong, and you have a strong tolerance for pain. So, it wouldn't affect someone like you as much as someone else who does have health issues or they're maybe elderly. So, yeah. So I think that has a lot to do with your recovery from it. If you're in good health and you don't have underlying health issues.
I know Harry had it at one point too, and he got through it. Do you have any updates for us on Harry? The last I heard, he was part of the NWA tag team tournament, and I think he made it to the finals.
Yeah, I haven't spoken with Harry in a while, but it looks like he's working a lot for the NWA, which is, I think, a pretty up-and-coming promotion down there, and they're using some pretty decent guys that aren't already working for WWE or AEW. So I think it's great for Harry. He's jump-starting his career, and he's always training hard. He's working out regularly, and he's so well versed in MMA and pro style. So I think he's doing very well with NWA, and I think he's got a great future. He's still got a lot of good years left in the industry. So.
Do you think we'll ever see Harry in MMA, or is he more just training in it to supplement his wrestling technical skills?
I think he's doing it just to supplement his wrestling skills. If he was going to go into MMA, I don't know if he's maybe past that window of opportunity. Harry's, I think, in his mid-30s now. I don't know his exact age, but and it would be pretty tough just to be trying to break in, trying to get introduced to that industry, and it's very tough. I don't know if I'd want to be competing with some of these younger guys, in their early 20s. You'd be giving up a lot of youth, I think, and desire to some of these younger guys. So I think for him, he's just using it to to improve his wrestling skills in the ring, and it keeps him in great condition, like he does it for his wind and his conditioning as much as anything. So I think for Harry, it's just so he can be a better performer in the ring, and he's very competitive with it. But I don't think at this stage he's really thinking about going into MMA, as a career. But you may see him appear in a couple of kind of freestyle competitions. Maybe I think he's doing that more just to stay competitive and just to gauge what he's doing against some other guys that are doing MMA. But I honestly don't think he's looking at it as a as a career or something he wants to transition from pro wrestling into.
And your niece, Natalia, recently got the record for most appearances of a woman on WWE pay-per-views in the history of WWE. What are your thoughts on that accomplishment?
Well, that's great. I'm really proud of Natalia or Natalie. It's a testament to her staying power, how long she's been in the WWE. And she's done great. Other than a couple of injuries, like she did uh, injure her Achilles tendon. She actually tore that about 2 years ago, and that only sidelined her for about a month or so. But aside from that, she stayed very competitive. She's had great longevity, and she, she's wrestled as a heel and she's wrestled as a baby face. She's won the world's title on 2 occasions, and she's still a very successful star there. She has a great fan base, and I think a lot of it has to do with her work ethic and just focusing on performing in the ring, and and taking care of her health. She's made all the road trips and endured the long travel, and she's stayed out of political issues, with which some of the other wrestlers haven't been able to do, and does her job very well. And she's, I think, just a very reliable, consistent performer. That the WWE can count on, and she's had a great run, and I think it says a lot about her staying power and ability just to keep up with some of the younger girls, and perform well night after night.
Now, one of the reasons you wanted to do the podcast with me today had to do with an interview I did with Adrian Street probably about 3 years ago now, where, of course, he wrestled for Stampede Wrestling, for anyone that doesn't know, around 1981. But he was talking about wrestling in Germany, where he had said in this interview that he was the one that brought Bret and Jim Neidhart to Germany. And I guess he got, according to him, Keith blacklisted from Germany. And you wanted to clear something up about that. And I guess since then, he may have mentioned some other things about your family on another podcast, which I haven't heard yet, but maybe you could clear this up.
Yeah, so I'll have to clarify, Devin. I heard Adrian on your podcast, and then another one that I think he did out of the States, and he made a lot of remarks about working for Stampede Wrestling and my dad in 1981, and also getting Bret and Jim booked for the Hanover tournaments in the fall of 1981. And a lot of the things he said were completely untrue. I was part of the industry then. I think I would have been in my early 20s, but I was at a lot of the shows. I knew a lot about the talent that was here at the time, and who was over and who wasn't. So I have a pretty accurate memory of what was going on in Adrian's experience here in Calgary. And I know a lot of the things he said were completely untrue. Maybe his memory's lapsed over 40 years since he was here, or he's just very bitter and didn't have positive memories about his experience working for Calgary, working in Calgary for my dad. But I know a lot of the things he said were completely inaccurate. So the first thing you had mentioned, though, was that he had helped Bret and Jim Neidhart get booked in Hanover, Germany that year. And that wasn't true. The promoter, this Heinrich Kaiser, came over directly to Calgary on a talent scout trip, and he booked wrestlers directly himself. He did book Adrian directly himself, but anyone else he booked was through my dad. So he'd booked Adrian to be sort of his clown heel. Adrian was doing the gay heel gimmick at the time, and Heinrich thought that would be something unique, something different that could get over in his tournament. So he did book Adrian directly himself, but Bret and Jim, got booked through my dad. Adrian had nothing to do with them getting booked. He said Bret had asked him as a favor if he could use his connections to get him booked with Kaiser in Germany. And Adrian said he liked Brett, said he would do what he could for him. And then Brett asked as a favor if he could book Jim Neidhart over. And Jim at the time was married to my sister Ellie. And that simply wasn't true. Brett and Jim got directly booked through Kaiser with my dad, and Adrian didn't use any of his own connections to get them booked there. He also said that my brother Keith asked him as a favor if he could get booked over there through Adrian, and Adrian didn't have a good relationship with Keith. They didn't get along very well. They had wrestled during the spring of 1981, and Keith was the Commonwealth junior heavyweight champion, and he worked a short program with Adrian, and their styles didn't mesh very well in the ring. Adrian's offense was pretty limited, and he didn't like selling or taking a lot of bumps, so Keith just didn't give him much in the match, and really just kind of guzzled Adrian. And so I think Adrian was pretty bitter at Keith about that, but Keith had never asked him about getting booked in Germany, and Adrian claimed that he told Keith, "I don't like you, and I wouldn't do anything to help you get booked in Germany." But they never ever had that conversation. That never ever took place. And Keith, he'd worked for Edmund Schober, who was the previous promoter in Hanover, like 2 years ago. He went over like in the fall of 1979. And that was it. That was his only tour there. But Adrian claimed that after Keith couldn't get booked through him, he flew himself over to Germany, paid his own airfare and his own accommodations, and worked on the shows there. And that wasn't true at all. Keith never even went over to Germany that year. And if I recall, he had just started working for the fire department. He was working full time for them. And, he wasn't even interested in going on any overseas tours. Aside from Germany and Japan a few years before, Keith was just wrestling locally. In fact, I think he even went to the Maritimes that summer. He worked for Emile Dupre that summer, but he was already working full time for the fire department, which became his career. And then he would just wrestle local shows in Calgary and Edmonton on the Stampede promotion. So Adrian's remarks about Keith wanting to get booked in Germany and approaching him personally and getting snubbed by Adrian because he didn't like him, and then flying himself over because he was that desperate to work there, were simply untrue. Those things never happened.
And you mentioned there was some other remarks you made on another podcast that were also not true. Do you recall what those were about?
Yeah. Adrian referred to my dad basically as sort of a sadistic bully who handpicked unsuspecting marks and lured them into the dungeon to take advantage of them and torture and embarrass them, but that these guys had no idea what was going to happen to them when they got into the gym, and that my dad was just sort of preying on them and taking advantage of their inexperience, I guess, or naivety. But to set the record straight, Adrian was never even at the dungeon. I don't believe he was even ever at the house during his stay in Calgary. So I don't know how he would make those remarks, that my dad was taking advantage of these guys and just bullying them, and was bitter and ruthless toward these guys, and just trying to punish them and embarrass them. But Adrian was never even at the house, so I don't know how he could make those remarks. But and he quoted my dad as kind of being sadistic toward them and laughing at them, and putting on a show basically for some of the other wrestlers who might be spectators. But again, he was never even at the house that I can recall, and he certainly wasn't at any of the dungeon sessions, where my dad worked out with guys wanting to train. So what he's saying is a total lapse of memory, or maybe it's just based on hearsay, but it's not from what he directly saw or experienced. But anybody who knew my dad knew that he was a very positive guy who always had a sense of humor, and he was always very inspirational with the talent around him. He wasn't he wasn't mean spirited. He wasn't a bully taking advantage of guys that wanted to break in, but he set a very tough standard for anyone wanting to break in. There are a lot of guys who approached him about getting into wrestling, and a lot of them were pretty big, strong, tough specimens, that you had to kind of work around. Some of them were other amateur wrestlers or boxers or from different martial arts at the time. Others were maybe construction workers, oil rig workers, farmers, but all big, strong guys. Some well over 200 pounds, and could probably handle themselves. And so my dad didn't take them lightly, and a lot of them approached my dad about getting into wrestling, and for some of them they just saw it as something pretty easy to get into. I can go in there and do all those moves and be a big star, and be a hero with fans and attract all the female fans. And a lot of guys kind of were just looking at those aspects of getting into wrestling, just an easy doorway or connection to my dad. And that wasn't my dad's philosophy. If he saw any potential in you, and my dad didn't seek these guys out, they usually would approach him. And he trained a lot of different boys over the years, and some who went on to become pretty good workers. But in these sessions that he trained guys, he would teach them how to lock up and bowl and push each other, and then try to get a takedown from a standing position. And it was always a case of you use your best moves against mine, and my dad's experience usually prevailed. But it wasn't like where you just sort of got these guys and put them on the mat and put holds on them and took advantage of them the way Adrian made out. That's just completely untrue. But my dad was very punishing with guys. You would put them in very uncomfortable thread throughs or guillotines or double grapevines, and you didn't get out of it. My dad would put you through a torturous session for 30 or 40 minutes, or sometimes until you blacked out or you lost consciousness. But he was teaching you how to do these things, and he would let these guys do these holds on him. Or if he had a few guys, quite often he only had one or two guys, but if he had a couple of guys, he would let them do the moves and apply them to each other, what my dad had taught them. And if you were strong enough to come back and you had the willpower and desire to come back, and you'd earned my dad's respect, then he would continue teaching you and make that gradual transition to mat and chain wrestling, and teach a lot of guys just survival skills and all the do's and don't do's of wrestling. And in my dad's defense, he never ever charged one guy that he trained. But he was just very passionate about protecting the business, and he didn't want guys breaking in too easily, because they wouldn't respect the industry, and they wouldn't last very long. There'd be too many other older, more experienced guys that would ring them out basically and take advantage of them. And so my dad set a tough standard for them, and he trained a lot of pretty distinguished wrestlers. He either trained them or he broke them in. But everyone from George Gordienko, Luther Lindsay, Archie the Stomper Goldie, Gorilla Monsoon, and more recent years, guys like Dan Crawford and Bob Pringle, who all became pretty good workers and had successful careers. And they withstood the pace. But I think if you could interview any of them who are still alive, they would tell you that my dad wasn't a bully. He didn't just take advantage of guys, and he wanted to teach them survival skills so they could handle themselves against other more experienced wrestlers. Or if they were in a nightclub or a bar and got confronted by a fan, and if you didn't know how to look after yourself, that could be such an embarrassment for you if some fan basically kicked your ass in a nightclub or bar, or jumped you in the ring at a show, if you got heat as a heel, especially. So my dad set that standard, and and he wasn't any easier on any of his sons. Like he did all these sessions with Brett and Bruce and Keith and Jim Neidhart. Jim trained with my dad, I think, on and off for a couple of years, and my dad was never easy on him. So, he set the same standards for anybody he trained with. But essentially, he was trying to teach you wrestling as a defense, and a way to protect yourself in any situation.
Now you mentioned Dan Crawford. I'm not sure if you were speaking about the one that was more famous in the 90s or the original Dan Crawford, but I'm actually interviewing the original Dan Crawford again tonight, the
Oh,
man
wow.
that invented the ladder match. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I am talking about Dan Crawford, the original, not Phil LaFawn, who took Dan's name quite a few years later. But Phil trained here as well, but he had trained mostly with me, myself. I remember I was kind of breaking him and Ben Bassarab in, and then Phil trained additionally with Mr. Hito, who was a really good teacher as well. But Dan Crawford, the original, he went through a lot of hard sessions with my dad. I think in the summer of '69, before he had broken in, and really good student. But Dan was a smart performer. He was very smooth in the ring. He knew the mechanics very well. He could throw great arm drags and drop kicks, but he had just unbelievable fire and timing. Really good interview skills. But he started as a raw rookie and worked his way up through the ranks, and became a very successful performer. He made a lot of money in Stampede and California. I think he wrestled for All Star as well. But I think he can certainly tell you about the initiation he went through with my dad, and he kept coming back. He went through some pretty painful sessions training with Stu, but he kept at it. He knew this was his best chance of breaking in and getting into the industry and working with some really experienced guys we had here at that time. And Dan was a true success story, but always very innovative too. He invented the ladder match, but he also came up with some other really interesting novelty matches like hair versus hair versus mask. The different handicap matches, and Dan was just a very innovative, progressive performer, and did a lot for the Stampede promotion for many years, and had incredible box office with Tor Kamada and the Stomper and King Curtis. So I have a lot of good things to say about Dan, and after he graduated from wrestling, he had a very successful career selling cars, and I think went into real estate as well, and has been a active force, I think, for environmental causes and helping disadvantaged people in sectors of society. And he's a great orator, and he's really used his public speaking skills, to advance a lot of important causes in society. So I have a lot of respect for Dan Crawford.
Now, I have a question for you from Mark the Shark DeCarlo, your good buddy Spencer. He wants to know, with them about to tear down the Victoria Pavilion next spring, could you share some of your favorite memories from there?
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that it was being demolished. It had stayed up during a lot of the demolitions in the Stampede grounds. Like they took down the Stampede Corral, which was the home of a lot of the bigger Stampede shows that we had during our Stampedes over the years, and they had a lot of concerts and circuses there. This was long before the Saddle Dome got built for the Flames in 1983, but and it seemed to survive all those executions, and now I'm just hearing, I guess, that it is set to be demolished. So it'll be sad, because it was where we had our weekly shows from from about 1948 right to 1990. We had wrestling shows every Friday there, and since our promotion kind of closed its doors, finally, so we did have some shows there. I think in 1999, 2000. I think in 1999, it's been mostly used as a auction place, where, for cattle and livestock events and things like that. So I'm not surprised if they're going to replace it with something modern, something new. But it's still a very important part of wrestling and entertainment history in Calgary. But Devin, I also wanted to comment on a couple of things that Adrian Street had also said, regarding working in Calgary for my dad. He had mentioned that as his wife and his valet, Linda, who I think many people are familiar with, came over and worked for my dad in 1981, and that Stu had underpaid her and kind of exploited her as a performer. And that's simply not true. When Adrian first got booked for Stampede, he'd used his contacts with Ted Betley, who is Dynamite and Davy Boy's trainer in England. Adrian was having trouble getting work at the time in the UK. I think he had pissed off a lot of promoters there, and he wasn't getting much work for the joint promotion or the other promotions. I think that might have been Brian Dixon and Org Williams, but basically he was persona non grata. He wasn't getting much work over there in the UK or Europe. So he had asked Ted as a favor if he could put a good word in for him with my brother Bruce, and see if he could get booked over here in Calgary, which might jumpstart his career. And we had booked quite a few guys over from the UK, including Dynamite and Davy Boy. In fact, I think Davy Boy came over 3 or 4 weeks after Adrian debuted. But also Frank Cullen, who did very well here as Robbie Stewart, and a lot of big names previously in the past. Everyone from Billy Robinson to Les Thornton to Jeff Ports to Kendo Nagasaki and Black Angus. But Ted had spoken with Bruce and asked as a favor if we could get him booked here, and Bruce said okay. And Bruce thought he might be able to get Adrian over as sort of a gay heel, which was something that was pretty successful in a lot of other territories, especially with Gorgeous George. So nowadays that wouldn't be so appropriate, I guess, but it was then. So my dad did book Adrian here, but Adrian never negotiated with my dad for Linda to come over as a valet. At the time, my dad already had two managers. He had John Foley and I think Jude Rosenblum as managers, and a full roster. A lot of expensive talent that he was paying, everyone from David Schultz to Leo Burke to Dynamite, who's making a lot of money at the time, and well deserved. Those guys worked hard, but he really didn't have the budget just to bring over a valet, and that was something that was kind of different at that time. There aren't very many promoters that used female managers or valets. It was just a different time period, and my dad really wasn't sold on that concept. So Adrian never really negotiated with my dad for Linda to be featured as a valet, and my dad said, well, I can't pay her a lot. He paid Adrian his guarantee, and my dad wasn't even really thrilled with the idea that she'd be traveling in the vans with all the other male wrestlers. But to Linda's credit, she weathered all of that, and she was married to Adrian, and she was part of his show, and when she came here, she did an incredible job. She could work herself. She had worked in England, and she was great as a manager and a valet, and she could really handle herself. Like, not too many fans tested her because she could handle herself, male or female fans that might have gone after her, because she was used to get heat with Adrian, to either attack the baby faces that were selling while Adrian was distracting the referee, or distracting the ref, so Adrian could do a cheap shot or something. So she performed very well in her role. And I don't know, Adrian said she was only making like $25 a week, which wasn't true. I think she was probably making $75, maybe $100, which wasn't a lot, and I would agree that she deserved more than that. But at the time, my dad really just didn't have the budget for an additional manager, and he made it clear to Adrian, if you want to bring her on the road with you, if you have to be together and she can't stay at home while you go on the road trips, then that's fine. Then you kind of have to assume that burden yourself. And so Linda did, travel with Adrian, and she was part of the shows, and Bruce incorporated her into his gimmick, basically, with Foley and Rosenblum, who managed Adrian. And she had incredible heat. Like she actually, I thought, worked harder than Adrian in the ring. And she was a very good protector of him. So I liked Adrian and Linda very much. And they both had pretty good heat. I think Bruce got them over very well, in this role, as a heel worker who seemed to be gay or homosexual, and yet, and Linda might have been perceived as a valet, or I don't know, fans had different interpretations of it, I guess, of her in the ring, but she complimented him very well in the ring, and I wish she had been paid better. And I think it was just at the times Stu just didn't have the budget, and really most promoters didn't have the mindset of using a female valet in the ring. But no offense against Adrian, but his work was quite limited in the ring. His offense was weak. He didn't like to sell or take a lot of bumps, and that's why he wasn't as successful with Stampede, as a lot of the others who came over from the UK, and that's why he didn't gel very well with Keith. And Keith basically just didn't give him very much in their matches because Adrian's output in the ring just was not very strong, and Keith basically just looked after himself and the industry. And didn't sell or give Adrian very much. And I think Adrian's pretty bitter about that 40 years later.
I did an interview with Dr. D, David Schultz, about a week and a half ago, and he said without question Stampede Wrestling was his favorite territory he ever worked. Are you surprised that he said that? And is there any stories you could share with us about him?
David Schultz, Dr. D, yeah, he had a real successful run here. I think he worked from about 1980 to 1984 here. Yeah, he was a good performer. Very strong on the mic. One of the best talkers in the industry. I think that's why the AWA recruited him from Stampede, and he did very well there, working against Hulk Hogan, I think, and then WWF picked him up as well when they brought Hulk over, and then raided the AWA of a lot of their talent. And David Schultz was one of the first ones they picked. He had incredible heat, and he was so strong on the mic, and he was tough. He could back himself up in the ring as well. So, but he was very successful. He made us a lot of money. He could be temperamental at times, David, and I think he was very edgy. And if he didn't like you, he didn't give you very much, but he made a lot of money here, and he was over great as a heel, and then when the time was right, we turned him into a baby face. We had kind of a falling out with John Foley, and I think it was Duke Myers and Kerry Brown, and it was kind of an unbelievable transition where he became a baby face and tag teamed with his arch rival Leo Burke to fight Foley's army, and just incredible. We had about 3 months of sellouts in Calgary and Edmonton, and shows all over. It was probably some of the best business Stampede ever did, and a lot of that we attributed to Dr. D and just how well over he was with the fans. And in a sense, he was kind of like a version of Randy Orton and Steve Austin that got over years later as kind of unpredictable, cold heel, but people identified that with that, and that's why I think he was over so well with the fans. People liked that David showed no respect to anybody and would would tell his boss off or tell a police officer off or anybody. He just had sort of no respect for authority and did things his way, and that got over very well, in Stampede, and it propelled him to do very well in the AWA and WWF, so. But David was not a guy to mess around with, and at times he could be unpredictable, and if something pissed him off, he didn't hold back, and a few guys bore the wrath of his anger, I guess, sometimes. And you had to be kind of careful with David. He could be temperamental and unpredictable, yet he was very loyal to the business and the promotion, and he would go out of his way to protect it. But I remember one incident, though, Devin. We did sort of an angle, and I think David was teaming up with Dynamite as heels against Brett and Bruce in a tag match, and just incredible heat. And Alexander Scott, who was a heel referee at the time, was reffing the match, and he had incredible heat, especially with Bruce, but the whole Hart family. And a lot of fans believed he was getting paid off by John Foley, and using his power to suspend some of the baby faces and help the heels get over. But it was all very subtly done, but it just had so much incredible heat. So there was an angle where Dynamite and Dr. D worked with Brett and Bruce in the match, and he had screwed Brett and Bruce and cost them the match, and the place just went nuts. The whole pavilion. There were fans kind of rioting and throwing chairs, and they were just so outraged that Sandy Scott had screwed Brett and Bruce. So anyway, Foley had passed Sandy his cane, and he used it to club Bruce, and Bruce was on the mat basically selling, and Dynamite and Schultz, I think, were putting the boots to Brett at the time. So anyway, some big fan jumped into the ring. I don't know how he got past security, but big guy, and he jumped into the ring, I think, to try and protect Bruce or try and pull Sandy Scott off Bruce. And David saw him coming, and he used this cane and just, I think the guy was coming in the ring, and David clocked him with a punch, saw him coming, and boom, just hit him right in the jaw, and the guy folded and went down. And then David took Foley's cane and clubbed this guy in the back of the head about 2-3 times, and Bruce was underneath the guy. Bruce was basically on the mat. This guy was on top of him after Schultz had KO'd him, and then clubbed him about 3 times with the cane. And Bruce thought the guy was going to die, because he could just feel the impact of the cane hitting this guy's his head. And anyway, luckily the other baby faces, I think he jumped in the ring, and they kind of cleared the ring, and they got this fan out of there. But that could have been pretty fatal, could have fractured his skull. But David was just not a guy to mess around with. He could be pretty volatile and unpredictable. If any fans got too close to him, and if any of the wrestlers pissed him off. So you wanted to stay on his good side for sure. But he made a lot of money for us and was a huge star that was very integral, in making Stampede one of the hottest territories. I definitely look at him and Dynamite and Davey and Leo Burke and some of them, that just had incredible drawing power and added so much variety to our shows and made Stampede such a hot promotion in the 80s.
There's a fan on here that would like to know if you could share any memories of J.R. Foley and Ed Whalen.
I watch a lot of the interviews, sometimes on YouTube, but John Foley was he was a great orator, really good manager. He and Ed really liked each other, and John's I think, key to his longevity is that he always put Ed over. He didn't try to take advantage of Ed or cut Ed off. He kind of let Ed have his say in the interviews, and Ed would always admonish him for cheating or interfering or bribing the referees or doing whatever he was doing, to win matches. And John was always making out that he was placing money on matches, and that it was very important that his stars went over, but he was always denying and feigning that he had ever interfered, and it was very obviously that John had cheated. He would always sort of deny that to Ed, and Ed would be a voice for the fans and say, "JR, you cheated. You tripped somebody, or you rang the bell when there was 10 seconds left to save your champion from defeat, and losing his title." But John, he got incredible heat, and he was never afraid to do whatever he needed to get heat. He wasn't afraid of the fans or mob situation, because he knew he could handle himself, and he also knew that the wrestlers had his back, especially Dynamite guys like that. They always made sure that if John was instrumental in getting heat, that they protected him. So the funniest lines with John and Ed Will, and I thought, were when Ed admonished him for cheating or getting involved in a match, and John would say, "Well, we're throwing a party tonight, Ed, to celebrate our victory, and you're not invited." You'd always say Ed wasn't allowed to come to the party, and it was great, and they would have that exchange week after week after week, and it was great, he was definitely one of the best managers of all time here, but he had some incredible talent too. But I thought John's best runs were with Dynamite, when he managed him, and with Duke Myers and Kerry Brown, and definitely an important part of the Stampede shows.
There's a fan on here that wants to know why your parents called you Inky.
The story I'm told is that when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I had gotten into my mom's ink bladder that she used for her fountain pens, and that I just loved to draw, I guess, or doodle, and that I took this ink blotter, and I smeared all the ink on the TV screen. And my dad wasn't too happy about that. I'm not sure if I don't think I got punished for it. I was only, I think, a couple of years old, but that's how I got the name Inky, because I was always kind of destructive. I remember years later, I took a crayon and drew all over the walls at my dad's place. My dad had just put up new wallpaper in the house, and you could see the yellow crayon marks that I had put there. And I kind of knew that I wasn't supposed to be doing that, but at times, maybe when I wasn't really being watched, I mean, there were so many other kids in the household. I would have been the youngest at that time. It would have been, I think, before Diana and Owen followed me. But definitely, I think it was because of the ink that I had smeared all over the screen of the TV set from my inks from my mom's ink pad. So the name Inky just sort of stuck with me after that.
Someone's wondering what Stu Hart would typically cook for breakfast for you guys.
Yeah, and he always did make our breakfast. My dad would always have breakfast ready for us on school days anyway, and to get us ready for the school bus that would come to pick us up. Always someone was late. Somebody was late getting downstairs, and the bus would be waiting for about 5 minutes for the last Hart to get on the bus. But my dad always made breakfast. Sometimes it was oatmeal cereal. Sometimes it was cream of wheat or oatmeal cereal. And sometimes it was bananas and cream, but it was always cereal and milk. He didn't really have time to make a more traditional breakfast like of bacon or eggs or anything like that. Not when you had to get 12 kids on the bus to school in a hurry. So he would just make a huge pot of oatmeal or cream of wheat cereal and have that ready for us at the table.
Someone wants to know if any of your brothers ever gave Stu a run for his money in the dungeon.
I don't think so. I think my dad was pretty intimidating, so he, I think some may have tried to outlast my dad, but I think we knew he was the master, and I think all of us trained with him. But I think there was a level of respect there, but a level of intimidation, and you wouldn't have tried to take liberties with my dad, like maybe take a cheap shot at him or something. I think he would let you go for your best move on him, but you didn't want to take liberties with my dad. There's a level of respect there. So and he was the master in the ring there, and so I think it would be like a lot of athletes. You have a level of respect for your coach or your teacher, and you're not going to try and beat them or embarrass them or show you're superior to them, because it wouldn't work, and it would end up very badly for you. So but Jim Neidhart, I watched some sessions with my dad, and they were like just two bulls going at it. They would go back and forth in the lockup position, sometimes for like 20-25 minutes, just working up a great sweat. And then Jim would try his hardest. He would try to use his bare strength. Jim was incredibly strong. He definitely was stronger than my dad, and he would try to take my dad down. He would try to do a double leg takedown or a hip toss or something, and my dad was usually ready for it. So Jim tried very hard, and Stu would just usually wear him out and maybe just outlast him after 30 or 40 minutes. And it's a great session, and then Stu would, once he got Jim on the mat, would usually smother him or immobilize him. But Jim, he tried very hard. He was intimidated by my dad, but he really wanted to see if he could up my dad, and catch him on a bad day. So I gave Jim a lot of credit, because he was game. But he was never able to catch my dad on an off day or win any of those battles. But it paid off for Jim. My dad worked out with him, and and it really improved Jim's endurance and conditioning. And he could use some power moves that my dad taught him. And Jim was not a guy you wanted to try and take advantage of. He just had such brute strength, and he gained a lot of toughness from those sessions with my dad.
Speaking of your dad's training, David would like to know who actually trained your dad for wrestling. I know he had several trainers from amateur to pro, as he was a very successful amateur first.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I think I'm trying to remember. There was a guy up in Edmonton who was a really good amateur wrestler that trained my dad, and I just can't think of his name right now. He wasn't a professional wrestler, but he was a submission style wrestler, and he trained a lot with my dad. But I'm sorry, I just can't think of his name right now. But my dad, he went through a tough initiation. He had both his ears cauliflowered. He had his nose broken, his teeth chipped, sometimes lacerations, but he worked out with some pretty tough guys, and this was, pretty much just submission style wrestling, but a lot of guys, might headbutt you or forearm you, and, definitely put their elbows against your ears and cauliflower them. But I just can't think of who. But there's a few different guys that trained my dad, and he kept coming back. And he had already done a lot of amateur wrestling. He was amateur champion of Canada and qualified for the Olympics. But when he did this level of training to kind of break into pro wrestling, it was a pretty hard initiation for him. But unfortunately, I can't just think of his name. But on another podcast, I'll get that information for you for sure, Devin.
Sounds good. Someone was also wanting to know what Bad News Brown was like to deal with.
Bad News, tough guy. Legitimately a great athlete, bronze medal winner in the 1976 Olympics in Montreal, and Pan Am champion in judo. Probably one of the toughest guys in the business. He knew judo very well. He knew street fighting very well. He's just not a guy you messed with in the ring. Yeah, he worked for my dad from about 1981 to 87 when he finally went to the WWE. So he's a whole story in himself. Again, I have a lot of respect for him. He was a great conditioned athlete, very tough in the ring, anywhere basically, and you didn't take liberties with him. He could do a lot of damage with you. He was difficult to deal with at times, and I can't go into a long story with him, but maybe part of it was his style in Japan, where they did a lot more brawling and fighting outside the ring, basically. But when he was here, at times he could be uncontrollable. Sometimes he'd be fighting outside the ring and a little too close to the fans, and then if one of the fans hit him or went after him because he was using a chair on somebody, or mauling one of the baby faces, outside the ring. The commission then would suspend him, and sometimes it's suspend my dad. So sometimes Alan was he just had a short leash, and he didn't control his actions enough. Because he was getting into altercations with fans and constantly getting suspended, and a lot of times he didn't follow orders. We would tell him, don't be fighting outside the ring, keep your distance from fans because you've already been targeted or suspended, and the commission's basically got a hard on for you. And sometimes he just didn't listen, and he kind of did things his way. So he did have some box office when he first came in. I remember he had some incredible street fights and cage matches with Brett and Dynamite, especially with Dynamite and even Davey Boy. But a lot of the other baby faces he just didn't sell for. And his motto seemed to be, well, you can get color for me, but I'm not going to get color for you. And if he's not selling for these guys and taking 80% of the match, then it's hard for these guys to get over, no matter what the outcome was. And unfortunately, I think he just took too much from guys that he was working with. He didn't sell enough for them or want to put guys over, and he was protecting his own image, more than doing what was best with the promotion. And so that way, he unfortunately had a lot of heat with different boys, and a lot of guys didn't actually feel comfortable working with him. And but he had a reputation though as a really tough guy and someone you didn't mess with, and I think that's what helped him get booked in WWE. Because they saw him sort of as a badass street fighter from Harlem, and a different type of heel, and that's why they brought him in to work with Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. And and he's very good on the interviews. He had an incredible heat, because he could be very intimidating, very powerful. When he did his interviews on Stampede, he didn't have good rapport with Ed Whalen. Ed was quite intimidated by Alan. They didn't have good rapport, and Alan unfortunately didn't gel very well with Ed. And Ed was the host of the show, and you had to kind of give him that respect, that leverage. If he wanted to cut the interview off or pull the mic away from you, you had to kind of give him that leeway, because he was the host of Stampede Wrestling, and a pretty iconic figure as a media broadcaster in the city. And Alan didn't really give that much to Ed. He just thought Ed was an announcer who didn't respect the wrestlers enough. So there definitely was a lot of friction between them. And after Alan had been suspended numerous times by the commission, and the promotion had gotten a lot of bad publicity over what was going on in the ring, Ed, I think, took a lot of that to heart, and he never ever felt comfortable interviewing Alan or being around him. So a lot of pros and cons about Alan, but again, I could do a separate podcast on him completely. But undeniably, very tough guy that you didn't want to mess around with.
Yeah, that might be a good idea sometime if you have the free time, because he's such an interesting character. Just a couple more questions for today. Someone wanted to know if you could share any stories about Andre the Giant.
Andre, yeah, what an incredible athlete, larger than life figure. He worked quite a few times for my dad. He would come in during the Stampede shows, and always a great draw. And what can you say about Andre? He was just an incredible performer. Who had great agility, knew how to wrestle. He wasn't just sort of a lumbering giant that got over because of his size. He had worked a lot in France and Europe, and then really learned how to wrestle in Japan. Long before he even came to North America. But he was a skilled athlete. Like for his size, he was incredibly gifted and could perform well in the ring, and not a guy that you took liberties with. But Andre could be temperamental at times. You just never knew what you're dealing with. He seemed to be more gentle and at ease with females. If especially if you're at a bar or a restaurant or a festive party or something. Andre was very uh, very, very much at ease, in a party like atmosphere. And he would buy rounds and rounds of drinks and champagne, for everybody. In that sense, he was very generous. But other times, he could be very moody and standoffish. I think he's very self-conscious about being someone that was unique and not being looked at as a freak, or someone that was different from others. So at times he wasn't very approachable about making public appearances or signing autographs. He could be very distant in that sense. And I remember one story, and it was just to me kind of a unfortunate thing. He was wrestling at one of the first WWF shows here, I think in 1984. I think it was after Stampede had closed, and Andre had been working in the main event, I think against Kamala. And it was the end of the show, and I think he just wanted to get back to his hotel. There were, some fan had gotten his son, all the way into the back area of the dressing rooms. I don't know how he got through security, but he brought his son, into the waiting area there, close to where the dressing rooms were, and it asked me if I could get an autograph of Andre the Giant for his son, and I said, I don't know if I can or not, because I knew Andre could be pretty standoffish, and if he was in a hurry just to get back to his hotel or get to the bar to join his friends, but I remember approaching Andre, said, there's a fan here, and he wanted to know if you would sign his autograph for his son. And Andre just kind of nodded like no, and walked right past the fan, and the guy saw that too. And I just felt kind of embarrassed. I thought, it wasn't like there was 50 people there, and if you had to sign one autograph, you'd have to sign them all. It was just one father there with his kid, who had waited and stuck around to the end of the show after all the fans had left, and Andre had even just stopped and signed it. Might have taken 10 seconds of his time, but that's the way he was. At times he could be very sociable, and if he had some friends around him, and he could be drinking beers or throwing wines back, and he could drink so much, it was incredible. He could drink a dozen beers in 30 minutes on a road trip, where half an hour into a plane taking off. There's Andre could just drink and drink, and I think he could be very merry and sociable at times, but at other times he could be pretty moody and standoffish, and not the easiest guy to negotiate with. So for my dad, it was hard to get Andre to appear at some of our functions, for the Stampede, like the grandstand show or the parade. He really didn't want to be a part of that. He just wanted time to himself, but he didn't realize those things, were helping us draw fans to the show, and get some PR and media attention. And Andre quite often would limit his availability for those things. So that was sometimes frustrating for my dad, and I think a lot of promoters that dealt with him. But an incredible athlete and a great performer, no doubt.
And final question for today. Thank you, fans, for all your questions. There's more, but I know you're a busy guy. But this is one that comes up a lot. Wayne would like to know, how difficult was Dynamite Kid to work with? Was he as bad a bully as he's made out to be, or are those stories exaggerated?
I think it depended on what Dynamite you're dealing with, but I I don't think he was a bully unless he didn't like you in the ring. You know, Dynamite, when he first came in for Stampede, he was so innovative, such a hard worker. He worked his ass off in the ring, and I don't think he would be a bully with. I don't think he was ever a bully with guys unless they didn't want to sell, they didn't want to work with him, or if it was someone who's totally green that probably shouldn't have been in the ring with him. You know, and they weren't cooperating or following Dynamite's lead. So he had a short temper for sure. Um, so you know, I remember one time he worked with some black fellow named Charles Buffon who came from Antigua. Charles had a great body, like one of the best physiques in wrestling, but he was clueless in the ring. You know, he just had no idea how to wrestle at all. And unfortunately, Dynamite had to work with him one time in Calgary. And it wasn't even like he was the intended opponent for Dynamite. I think somebody else hadn't shown up, and Dynamite's opponent didn't show up, so Dynamite had to work with Charles, and uh, it didn't go very well. You know, Dynamite, he just found Charles very stiff and awkward and unrelaxed in the ring, and Tom didn't have much time or patience for that. And I think about 2 minutes into the match, he knocked Charles down and then hauled off and kicked him right in the side of the face and broke his jaw. You know, so yeah, he could take liberties with you, but usually, you know, it was a situation where you didn't sell or cooperate with him, or you know, if you didn't want to sell for Dynamite because he was a smaller guy and he was tough and feisty, and I always admired his work ethic. Though, you know, he worked his ass off in the ring and did whatever he could to get his opponent over and himself. You know, and in that sense, he was just a very hard working promoter that wanted to make money, and but he also instilled fear and intimidation in some of the other guys, some of the lazier boys from the South, from the States, who didn't have the work ethic with Tom. So when they worked with Tom, they knew they better keep up with him and put out, otherwise he wouldn't give them anything, you know, and rightfully so. So, but you know, I don't know, you know, I know he pulled a lot of ribs and pranks. I don't know if that's bullying so much. I think it was more taking advantage of people and having a laugh at other people's expenses. And you know, he did that with different wrestlers, different fans or marks that got too close to him. So I think you'll read about Dynamite a lot in the new book that's coming out by Stephen Bell on the life of the British Bulldogs. And I think he gives you a lot of insight about Dynamite's personality and behavior. But for the most part, when he worked with Stampede, he was just a incredible performer who revolutionized the business, made us a lot of money, and definitely advanced the work pace and style for the territory. You know, and when he worked hard and set that standard, everybody else had to work hard just to try and keep half pace with him. You know, that's just how great a performer he was. You know, and there's nobody that could outperform him or look better than him. You know, so but you know, just an incredible performer though, and we should never forget how much he contributed to the industry, whether it was here or it was Japan or Britain or the WWF. You know, just a phenomenal, one of a kind athlete.
That's for sure. And I really appreciate you coming on, answering all these questions and clearing up the Adrian Street remarks that you wanted to get into. Where could fans follow you if they want to follow you on social media?
You know, I don't have a podcast of any kind, Devin, but I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. So, you know, I get a lot of fan requests and people reaching out to me. So I can't get to all of them. So probably, you know, doing podcasts with you if I do them in the future, might be the best way they can reach out to me. But I've got a lot of different stories and perspectives about the industry. I love growing up with it. It gave me so many great experiences. I love being a part of it, and doing future podcasts with you, I think we could look at some different topics, different eras or generations or periods of wrestling, and I consider myself a pretty good historian. I have a strong memory and recollective things that I grew up with. So, it's definitely some interesting stories to tell. But you can try and reach out to me on one of those social media networks. Otherwise, I look forward to doing future podcasts with you.
Well, I appreciate it. And you're always a wealth of knowledge. And it's wonderful to hear the stories from your perspective. And I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Well, I think just keep supporting the wrestling industry. There's a lot of incredible talent still in the WWE and AEW, but also promotions like NWA and MLW. And those wanting to, I guess, break into the industry, go to a credible teacher, learn properly how to get into wrestling, deal with someone who's experienced and who's going to basically take you under their wing and teach you properly how to wrestle. Don't use the backyard approach with wrestling. If you're going to learn to wrestle, break in properly with somebody experienced or with a credible school, and there are still some of them around. My brother Bruce ran one of the best training camps in the industry. Lance Storm was another, but those are kind of gone. But there are some I think pretty credible teachers out there, and get that opportunity, I guess, to break in with a smaller promotion and see how it goes from there. I think the bigger promotions are still looking at younger talent from different independents, and if you have the right influences and the right promotion to break in with, and can videotape some of your matches and interviews and send them, to AEW, WWE. Your chances of making it to the big time might be as good as anybody else's.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Facebook at The Hannibal TV for more live streams and videos. And while you're at it, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Hannibal